Colorado is socially distanced from Washington, D.C. by about 1,000 miles, but today they got close. A supreme argument about how Colorado and all of America picks a president. The justices heard our case by phone. Governor Polis meets face-to-face with President Trump, and he talks about why he didn't challenge the president's false claims. FEMA says it did not divert critical supplies from a nursing home with an outbreak of coronavirus. We'll look at how farmers markets are going to function this summer. And after our anti-tourism ad last night, Nebraska responds. Get your popcorn ready. This is next. The story of Colorado's meeting with the president had one big false claim and a bit of fine print. So they met, they talked. Democratic Governor Jared Polis says he stressed the importance of keeping the supply chain connected, getting protective equipment to Colorado. The White House used props, as it often does, to make a point, signs proclaiming how much supplies had been provided to Colorado already. Governor Polis said after leaving the White House that the signs actually had small print, actual small print, noting that those impressive totals included what Colorado had bought for itself. President Trump took the opportunity in front of the governor to repeat his false claim that mail-in ballots, like the ones we have in Colorado, lead to widespread vote fraud.
The problem with the mail-in ballots, it's subject to tremendous corruption, cheating. So they want to be able to make sure that Republicans can't win an election by putting in all sorts of mailing ballots.
Polis said after their meeting that he saw voting as an unrelated issue and did not want to get into it to correct the president. We've explained here how Colorado's mail-in elections have been run safely and fairly by both Republican and Democratic secretaries of state. Republican Senator Cory Gardner, there at the meeting, also did not correct the president's false claims about mail-in ballots being an anti-Republican ploy. Of course, Senator Gardner was elected in Colorado's first mostly all-male election. Colorado's day at the U.S. Supreme Court was bound to be strange, with arguments being done by phone, and that was before the subtle Lord of the Rings reference. The justices are deciding whether electors should be bound to the choice of a state's voters or whether one can just go rogue, like Colorado's Michael Baca did with his choice in 2016. Our Marshall Zellinger and a Hobbit explain.
The Colorado Department of State versus Michael Baca.
It's an unusual time when you're arguing before the United States Supreme Court from an 8th-floor conference room in Denver, almost 1,700 miles away.
Once people are voting to make a choice, people have a right for their ballots to be counted.
The room was less formal as Democratic Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser argued the question of whether electors like Michael Baca in 2016 can cast electoral college votes for whomever they choose, or if states are legally allowed to bind them to the candidate the voters chose for them. It's a question that apparently requires the help of a Hobbit.
The elector who had promised to vote for the winning candidate could suddenly say, I'm going to vote for Frodo Baggins, and I really like Frodo Baggins. And you're saying under your system, you can't do anything about that.
Your Honor, I think there is something to be done because that would be the vote for a non-person. The framers hashed out these competing concerns. They hashed it out in Philadelphia in 1787. They understood the stakes, and they said among these competing hypotheticals, electors are best placed to make the ultimate selection.
Which is why Baca wanted to ignore his instructions to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and chose John Kasich instead.
What is the purpose of having electors?
When electors are set up in the constitutional design, that allows for states to make a choice. Electors can either vote as proxy voters on behalf of the public, as we do here in Colorado, or they can be free agents. By having this structure uniform across the several states, you give states the ability to choose which model they want.
We as electors must retain that discretion.
Polly Baca, who is not related to Michael Baca, was also an elector in 2016 and was going to change her vote, but did not after she saw what happened to Michael. She was part of the lawsuit that ended up at the Supreme Court today, which could directly impact her, since she's again an elector this year if the Democratic nominee for president wins in Colorado.
We must be able to vote our conscience, or else why do you have human beings involved in this process?
Marshall, unfortunately, is a lot better with both audio and video, so this is going to be the point where I just thank him for that report and move along. FEMA insists it did not divert protective supplies from a senior care facility in Brush where a dozen residents have died of COVID-19. So FEMA's saying that it did not go in and take away the disinfectant wipes before the order to Ebenezer Lutheran Care Center could be filled. FEMA said that it is in no position to demand that factories in China hand over supplies to one facility or municipality over another. And FEMA says they often get blamed when it's the vendor who just can't complete the order. So speaking of supplies and where they go, we took our opportunity with FEMA's regional administrator today to ask whatever happened when Colorado's Democratic governor said that the feds blocked our purchase of 500 ventilators, only to be given 100 ventilators from President Trump, who said that we should thank our Republican Senator Cory Gardner.
FEMA did not swoop in and take those. I do not know what happened in the sale of those directly to Colorado. I cannot speak to that piece of it, but I can speak to the fact that that we did not do that. The 100 ventilators came from the Strategic National Stockpile.
The vendors involved in the missing shipment to that care home in Brush tell us that the masks and gowns, the rest of the order, is on its way. About half of Colorado's restaurants are closed right now. Colorado Restaurant Association told us that. And they also told us that the federal program designed to help small businesses was not particularly designed to help restaurants. Here's Anusha Roy.
Let's start with the good and how the Paycheck Protection Program helped out Michi handcrafted Italian.
It's allowed us to keep paying bonuses to managers and keep every single staff member employed with our company.
Elliot Schiffer says they were already doing a lot of deliveries before the pandemic. And since that's one of the only options for them to do business right now, it's working out.
The delivery business grew quite significantly over the last couple of months, and so we've been hiring in those two restaurants.
But not everyone has the same business model.
PPP loans are actually really difficult for restaurants to be able to use.
To trigger the forgiveness clause in the PPP loan, restaurants have to spend most of the money to keep employees on payroll.
Sure, they say that you can pay people to stay at home, but again, then why is that helping a business?
After surveying hundreds of restaurants, the Colorado Restaurant Association found around half are temporarily closed. But unlike other businesses, they are still waiting on when they can open up their dining rooms.
Easter came and went, Mother's Day came and went, Memorial Day will come and go, and we will still be closed.
A quarter of the loan can go towards operation costs. Restaurant owners like Bobby Stuckey said ideally they'd have more flexibility to go towards things like rent, utilities, and unique to the restaurant industry, all the food they bought that's now gone bad.
So you have spent thousands, tens and thousands of dollars.
As fast as it was implemented, it was probably not going to catch every single situation.
The Small Business Administration says the program is not perfect, but it can still be useful. For example, bringing back people to deep clean and plan for next steps.
Kind of make it easier so when we are at full capacity, they'll be prepared and ready to go because they've already started rehiring their employees.
For Next, I'm Anusha Roy.
Let's end on a hopeful note. There's still money left in the loan program. More restaurants did get money in the second round of it than the first. And as we've seen before, there are ongoing discussions about how to fine-tune the PPP program so that it can help more businesses.
In criminal cases, detectives say the first 48 hours are critical to solving the case. Tonight, we look at the first 48 days of America's response to the pandemic. Our investigation gives new perspective on what went wrong. And our anti-tourism ad poked a little fun at Nebraska. There is a state that would like to have a word with us. Next.
We are getting some feedback on our spoof anti-tourism ad. Colorado's Tourism Board has a very real new campaign trying to convince tourists to put off travel to our state due to COVID-19. So we made them a TV ad that suggested, among other things, that tourists could enjoy Nebraska instead. Well, not all of Nebraska enjoyed me saying that. Cindy wrote in from the Panhandle, not happy, noted that a whole lot of Colorado looks a whole lot like Nebraska. That's fair. Amanda wrote in saying that she is a Coloradan from Nebraska, She thanked us for the good laugh and asked if we would make a Nebraska ad next. I looked into this. Nebraska's Tourism Commission is offering 10 virtual tourism experiences online, so you can visit Nebraska from the comfort of your home. But they, too, do not have a TV ad yet. Someone should fix that.
It was a warm, windy Wednesday, despite the fact that we saw plenty of clouds out there with daytime highs in the upper 70s. Tonight, a cold front starts pushing through. You can see all those clouds on HD Doppler 9 with the isolated storms primarily in Wyoming and Nebraska this evening. 40s for overnight lows across eastern Colorado. A really mild evening for you and fairly dry, except for the high country where you might find a few isolated snow flurries, again above 11,000 feet. 2-3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, here come the storms. They'll rumble off to the eastern plains and be out of our neck of the woods by about 11 o'clock tomorrow. Daytime highs much cooler, but still nice in the lower 70s. We'll be tracking a chance for storms Friday and Saturday before we rebound, and the heat is on. Sunshine and highs in the upper 80s early next week.
Our next question comes from a viewer named AJ. AJ and his wife are concerned that farmers markets may not open by summer because of the pandemic, and AJ wanted to know if there are other ways to support Colorado's farmers and to get fresh produce.
So here's the deal, AJ. Farmers markets are allowed to open whenever they want to because they're deemed an essential business. It's like a grocery store. Now, some of farmers markets in Colorado are delaying their openings because they're trying to incorporate social distancing guidelines. The Colorado Farmers Market Association and the State Health Department work together on these guidelines. Here's some highlights. Fewer people allowed in at once. No samples, no reusable bags. Vendors are going to have to wear masks and gloves, and there will be touchless payment systems. Some farmers markets have decided to move right away to online ordering and curbside pickup.
Hi, Colorado. It's me, Nebraska. Perhaps you know me from dominating our all-time football rivalry. Perhaps you know me from growing the food that you eat, only to pretend to work off on hikes that are for Instagram, not exercise. But perhaps you know me, Nebraska, because I have an actual lake. Lake McConaughey is one smoking hot body of water. Let's just say if you had something this good at home, you Coloradans wouldn't be coming around all the time. Denver City Park supposedly has 2 lakes. Nice try. If you can throw a baseball over it, it's a pond, not a lake. Back to our real lake. Camping there is closed until next week. To simulate your Lake McConaughey experience, Colorado, grab a case of beer, let it get warm in the sun, put your feet in a kiddie pool, and sit there for hours while both you and your skin get way too toasted. And we'll see you next football season. Not paid for by the Nebraska Tourism Commission, but they can totally use it if they want.
Sitting next to Governor Polis at the White House today, the president said that the United States has topped 10 million COVID-19 tests. That certainly is a big deal. Because in the early days of this, our country was struggling to test even a few dozen people at a time. Our Chris Vanderveen takes an in-depth look at the first 48 days of this country's response to a deadly pandemic.
Without context, numbers appear chaotic, as erratic as a gust of wind. Without context,
high alert for pneumonia outbreak in the city of Wuhan.
Numbers like 48 and 60 mean little, but give it a moment, because soon enough they will.
Coronavirus.
10 days after the Centers for Disease Control warned U.S. doctors of an outbreak of pneumonia in Wuhan, China, the CDC tested its first patient.
Global concern about
this new coronavirus strain
is to detect this virus early.
It found its first case 3 days later.
A man in Washington State.
In his 30s. When a test found it in Washington State.
First confirmed U.S. case of the contagious coronavirus.
Following day, the president,
we have it totally under control,
appeared unfazed.
It's going to be just fine.
And day after day after day, all was fine. Until one day, someone suggested maybe it wasn't.
We don't know the accuracy of this test.
Not that it stopped an anxious CDC from sending those tests to various state labs, but there was clearly a problem. Supplied with the new kits, states managed to test no more than 1, 0, 3, or 2 samples per day. Finally, by mid-February, the CDC admitted
They were getting indeterminate answers.
the tests it had sent states had not worked well.
So we're taking a little extra time here.
Flawed results stalled testing nationwide. 69 samples tested, 63 samples tested. By the time the CDC remedied the problem with the tests, the president suggested the low case counts were a good sign.
So far, we have lost nobody to coronavirus in the United States.
The next day, nobody turned into one.
Tragic news.
Now the first U.S. death.
It was a male in his 50s.
This is still rapidly unfolding.
Then one turned into 6, which turned into 14.
Anybody that wants a test can get a test.
Context. In a country of more than 327 million, that day, the 48th day of testing, little more than 2,900 had received a test. Little more than 2,900, less than 1/100th of 1% of the country. Context. In 48 days, the U.S. had managed to test, on average, roughly 5 dozen people per day. As patients sought limited testing, cases doubled every 2 days. 400, 1,300.
Now have the capacity to test up to 75,000 people for COVID-19.
That day, the U.S. had tested roughly 6% of that number, roughly 5,000 in all tested. Deaths remained rare, 43, 51. Yet that day,
that is a failing.
And a failing, yes.
It is a failing. I mean, let's admit it.
Dr. Anthony Fauci finally said what anybody who wanted a test already knew.
The idea of anybody getting it easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, we're not set up for that. Do I think we should be? Yes, but we're not.
The following day, 1,300 positive cases and at least 55 deaths.
We therefore expect up to 500,000 additional tests will be available early next week.
It would take another 13 days for the country to test 500,000. 13 days of more cases and a rapid increase in deaths. 100, 200, 400, 700, 1,200. By the time the country tested 500,000, the country had confirmed more than 86,000 positive cases.
We're just learning about this for the first time.
A statewide order for people to stay at home.
And by the time the country tested 1 million, more than 3,800 were dead.
The death toll is rising.
We are in the surge, yes.
Context. During the first 48 days of testing, the country managed to test roughly 5 dozen patients a day. More than a month later, we are still trying to understand the ramifications of that, at a time when even now, anyone who wants a test still can't get a test. So why is this a big deal? Because early on, states were really struggling to identify clusters like the ones we ultimately found in Colorado, in Eagle and El Paso counties. And while Colorado identified its first patient on March 5th, the state health department now believes the virus was circulating around the state as early as February, if not earlier. Kyle, that is the time when there was absolutely no testing taking place in the state.
Just remarkable. We will return in a moment with feedback from a next viewer who thinks that we are messing with your heads. That is obviously not the case, but we'll address it next. Finish with your feedback. Jeff writes in, smart political move by Governor Polis today not to call out Trump on untrue statements. Trump has the checkbook, and we need the financial help. Stacy said that she watched our news segment, also watched the full thing of Trump and Polis talking, said Polis was not wearing a mask. She said that she found it disturbing that we chose to use the images of him wearing a mask. It was a short clip. I'll be honest with you. I don't think that we really thought about which one we were showing, and we chose not to address the whole mask, no mask thing in our clip. A couple of you have written in saying that you think that we have been messing with you by altering our background. I don't think that's the case. I'll see you next time.